Hello everyone. Have you ever looked across the dinner table and felt like the man sitting there is no longer the same one you married? His body is present, yes. He eats, he nods, he asks about the bills or the kids' schedules, but his eyes are somewhere else. His touch feels absent. His laughter, once so easy, now comes with effort. And you wonder quietly to yourself, where did he go? What happened to us? This is one of the most painful silences in a marriage. Not the arguments, not the slammed doors, not even the nights slept back to back without speaking. The deepest ache is when distance creeps in slowly, so silently that you can't point to the exact moment it began. All you know is that the man you love feels further away, and the harder you try to reach him, the further he seems to drift. But here's the truth. His distance is not always a rejection. Often it's a signal that something inside the marriage or inside of him is longing for attention, for understanding, for repair. And before you rush to blame yourself or him, you need to know there are ways to bridge this gap, to bring warmth back into what feels cold, to reawaken intimacy before it's too late. So let's walk into this together, because the question isn't, why is he distant? The real question is, how can you reach for him in a way that makes him want to come closer again? Let's stay with that moment, the one where you're sitting across from him, maybe over dinner, maybe while he scrolls his phone on the couch. You glance at him and wonder, where are you? Why don't I feel you anymore? It's a strange kind of loneliness to feel alone next to the person who promised to share your life. And if you're here listening, then part of you already senses that his distance isn't something to dismiss. It's something that needs attention before silence hardens into walls too high to climb. You see, men don't always become distant because they've stopped loving. Often, they pull away because they don't know how to bring their needs into the relationship without fear of judgment or failure. Sometimes, the distance is their unspoken language, their way of saying, something here feels unsafe for me. That doesn't mean unsafe in a physical sense. It means emotionally unsafe. Maybe he fears he can't get it right with you. Maybe he feels invisible. Maybe he feels pressure he can't voice. And instead of finding words, he retreats. The tragedy is that many women, when faced with that retreat, respond in the opposite way. They lean in harder, they ask more questions, they push for connection, they demand reassurance, and suddenly a cycle begins. The more she reaches, the more he withdraws, the more he withdraws, the more she panics, until one day it feels like you're chasing a shadow. But here is the first truth I want you to carry with you. When he is distant, chasing him with panic or pressure will not bring him back. It will push him further. Because distance in marriage often thrives on the absence of breathing space. So what do you do instead? You begin with curiosity, not control. Instead of asking, why don't you talk to me anymore? You might try, I've noticed you've been quieter lately. I miss you. Is something weighing on you? Notice the difference. One frames him as the problem, the other invites him into partnership. Men are far more likely to open up when they don't feel interrogated, but instead feel seen. And sometimes it's not even about the words. Sometimes the way back into connection starts with presence. Maybe you sit next to him while he's watching his favorite show, without asking anything, without needing anything, just sharing the space. Intimacy doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. It's often rebuilt in the smallest, most ordinary moments where safety returns. Now I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever considered what his distance might really mean? Not the story you tell yourself, he doesn't love me, or must be interested in someone else, but the deeper story that lives inside him. Sometimes his distance is a shield, protecting him from feelings of inadequacy. Sometimes it's the residue of stress he doesn't know how to process. Sometimes it's the only way he knows to reclaim a sense of control when life feels overwhelming. So the first step before any action is to resist the temptation to make his distance about you. Yes, it affects you deeply, but if you interpret his withdrawal as rejection, then everything you do next will be laced with fear, and fear never invites intimacy, it chases it away. Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing on opposite sides of a river. You see him drifting further and further, and instinctively you want to shout louder, wave bigger, swim toward him in desperation. But what if instead you slowed down, stood firmly on your side, and built a bridge of patience, of listening, of quiet presence, a bridge that says, I'm here, I'm not going to drown trying to pull you back, but I'm also not leaving, I'm steady. That steadiness is often the thing a distant man doesn't even know he craves until he feels it. Now let's look at another layer. When a man grows distant, it's rarely only about his inner world. It's also about the dynamic between the two of you. Relationships are not static, they're living systems. If he has withdrawn, then something in the dance you're both doing together has shifted. Perhaps you've been carrying resentment that shows in your tone. Even if you don't say it outright, perhaps intimacy has become routine, predictable, and he doesn't know how to reignite desire without risking rejection. Perhaps your roles have become so fixed. He's the provider, You're the organizer, that neither of you feels the aliveness of being truly chosen anymore. This is why distance in marriage isn't just his problem to fix or your problem to solve. It's a mirror, reflecting the state of the relationship itself. And the couples who survive these moments are not the ones who wait for the distance to magically disappear. They're the ones who lean into the discomfort and say, what is this distance trying to tell us? So let's get practical. One of the most powerful things you can do when he grows distant is to resist immediate reaction and instead cultivate reflection. The next time he seems checked out, rather than demanding, "What's wrong with you?" pause and ask yourself, what's happening in our relationship right now? Have we lost playfulness? Have I been carrying unspoken anger? Has he been overwhelmed with responsibilities? When you begin to reflect, you see the distance not as a wall, but as a doorway. And here's another truth. If you want him to return, you have to create a space that feels worth returning to, not perfect, not pressure-filled, but safe, warm, and alive. You do this not by fixing him, but by softening yourself, by remembering that intimacy is not built on endless conversations about what's wrong, but on creating experiences that remind both of you why you chose each other in the first place. Maybe that means suggesting something unexpected, taking a walk together at night, turning off the lights and dancing in the living room, surprising him with a memory you both cherish. Because distance often shrinks when play and pleasure return. Men like women need to feel desired, not just needed. They need to feel chosen, not just tolerated. And when a man senses that his partner is reaching for him not out of fear, but out of genuine desire, something inside him begins to soften. So if your husband is distant, let this be your starting point: curiosity, reflection, and the quiet rebuilding of safety and desire, not pressure, not panic, but presence. When distance settles between two people who once promised closeness, the silence can feel unbearable. You might find yourself lying in bed, glancing at his back, wondering how something so simple, like reaching for his hand, now feels so complicated. It's easy to tell yourself that he's the one who changed, that something inside him closed off. But intimacy isn't about one person's actions alone. It's about the dance between two partners, and every step he takes away has a response from you, even if you don't notice it. One of the most powerful ways to understand his distance is to consider the environment of your relationship. Ask yourself, does he feel like there is space for him to bring his inner world into the marriage? Many men grow up learning that vulnerability is weakness. They are taught to fix, to provide, to act, but not to feel. So when they encounter stress, whether it's financial, professional, or even emotional, they don't always come to their partner with it. Instead, they retreat, not because they don't love you, but because they don't trust that their inner turmoil won't make them look smaller in your eyes. And this is where so many women, often without realizing it, contribute to the gap. Think of the last time he shared something vulnerable, something that hinted at fear or insecurity. Did you reassure him, or did you try to correct him? Did you tell him not to worry, to be stronger, to think differently? Sometimes even loving responses can carry subtle messages of dismissal, and when that happens, he learns that silence feels safer than speaking. If you want to invite him back from his distance, begin by shifting the way you respond. When he offers you a glimpse into his world, no matter how small, resist the urge to fix it or interpret it. Instead, listen. Let his words breathe. And if you don't know what to say, something as simple as, "I hear you, thank you for telling me," can create more intimacy than a dozen lectures or reassurances. Now, let's look at another layer, the weight of unspoken expectations. Every marriage, no matter how modern or traditional, carries silent agreements. Who plans the holidays, who manages the finances, who keeps track of the children's needs, who initiates intimacy? Often these agreements begin unconsciously, but over time they harden into roles. And sometimes when a man grows distant, it's because he feels trapped in a role that doesn't allow him to express his full self. For instance, he may have become so accustomed to being the provider that he no longer feels like a lover. Or he may feel so responsible for the household logistics that he forgets what it's like to be playful. When intimacy reduces a man to only his function, he often retreats, not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't recognize himself in the relationship anymore. This is why I often say to reconnect, you must bring back a sense of fluidity. Surprise him. Step outside of your role as the manager, the planner, the caretaker, and reach for him as a partner, a man, a human being who longs to be desired and chosen. When he feels like you're not only depending on him, but also delighting in him, his distance begins to soften. But let's be honest, this isn't always easy, especially if his withdrawal has already left you feeling rejected. When you're starving for attention, how do you offer warmth without resentment? How do you invite closeness when all you feel is hurt? This is where self-awareness becomes essential, because resentment, when left unchecked, leaks into every gesture. You can say, "Let's spend time together," but if your tone carries accusation, he will sense the trap. What he hears is not, "I miss you, but you failed me," And nothing closes a man faster than the fear of failure in the eyes of his partner. So here is a practice before you reach for him. Check in with yourself. Are you reaching from love or from fear, from invitation or from demand, from desire or from duty? The energy behind your gestures often matters more than the gestures themselves. A touch on his arm when filled with accusation will make him pull away, but the same touch filled with softness and genuine desire can remind him of the connection he thought was lost. Now let's talk about the unspoken battlefield where distance often takes root: intimacy itself. Many couples, after years together, stop seeing intimacy as something playful and alive. It becomes scheduled, predictable, or worse, neglected. And when intimacy becomes mechanical or absent, it's not just physical connection that suffers, it's the emotional bond. For men especially, intimacy is often one of the few places they feel truly vulnerable, truly seen. So when that space is lost, they may pull back not only from the bedroom, but from the relationship as a whole. If your husband is distant, it may be worth asking yourself, when was the last time intimacy between us felt alive, spontaneous, even playful? Not just sex as duty, not just a routine act, but as an expression of desire. Distance often grows where desire has withered. And yet desire is not something you wait for, it's something you cultivate. It thrives on imagination, surprise, and space. That doesn't mean grand gestures or elaborate plans. It can be as simple as leaving him a note that says, "I was thinking about you today." It can be as subtle as a lingering kiss that has no agenda but to awaken memory. It can be as playful as teasing him with a glance across the room. These small moments remind him and you that intimacy is not a chore but a choice. And when desire re-enters the relationship, distance often loses its grip. But desire alone is not enough. Men return not only when they feel wanted, but when they feel safe. Emotional safety is the soil in which intimacy grows, and emotional safety comes from acceptance. Can he bring his flaws to you without fear of contempt? Can he admit that he feels tired, lost, or even unmotivated without being judged? If the answer is no, then his distance is not surprising, it's protective. Here's something I want you to consider: the way you respond to his weakest moments teaches him whether closeness is worth the risk. If he feels like every confession will be met with criticism, he will choose silence. But if he senses that his vulnerability draws you nearer instead of pushing you away, he will slowly begin to trust closeness again. This doesn't mean you ignore your own needs. Your hurt, your loneliness, your longing, they matter too. But the paradox of intimacy is that sometimes, to receive love, you must first create the conditions in which it can be safely offered. And those conditions are built not with control but with presence, not with demands but with curiosity, not with ultimatums but with invitations. So the next time you feel his distance, instead of saying, "You never talk to me anymore," try, "I love hearing what's on your mind. I'd love to know what you've been thinking about lately." Instead of, "Why don't you touch me anymore?" try, "I miss feeling close to you. Can I hold you?" These shifts in language are small, but they carry enormous weight. They transform accusations into invitations, demands into desires. And men respond not to pressure, but to the sense that they are wanted, not required. There is a moment in every marriage where silence becomes heavier than words. You sit together, perhaps even touch shoulders, but the current that once passed effortlessly between you now feels blocked. This is where resentment quietly begins to weave itself into the fabric of the relationship. And resentment, if left unchecked, is one of the greatest killers of intimacy, because resentment doesn't shout. It doesn't always look like angry confrontations or harsh words. More often, it shows up in subtle ways. In the sigh you let out when he forgets something important, in the edge of your tone when you ask for help, in the way you pull back a little bit when he finally does reach for you. Over time, these small signals communicate not love but disapproval, and when a man senses disapproval more often than desire, he retreats, not always consciously. Sometimes he doesn't even realize he's doing it. But slowly, distance replaces closeness. So if you want to close the gap between you, you must face the quiet poison of resentment. Ask yourself, what am I still holding against him? What stories am I carrying about what he failed to do or who he failed to be? And more importantly, am I willing to let those stories soften, to create space for something new? Letting go of resentment doesn't mean erasing your hurt. It means choosing to stop letting your pain be the narrator of your marriage. It means allowing forgiveness to enter, not as an excuse, but as an invitation to begin again, because nothing pulls a man closer than feeling that he is seen not only for who he was yesterday, but for who he could still become tomorrow. But of course, this is easier said than done. You might be asking, how do I let go of resentment when the hurt feels so real? The answer lies in shifting your focus from blame to understanding. Instead of replaying the ways he disappointed you, ask yourself, what might have been happening for him in that moment? What was he carrying? What was he afraid of? What story was he telling himself? You don't have to agree with his behavior to understand the pain behind it. And when you can see his pain, even through your own, you create a doorway for compassion. And compassion is often the first step toward intimacy. Now let's talk about trust. Because distance isn't always about daily frustrations. It can also be about broken trust. Perhaps he kept something from you. Perhaps he made a choice that left you doubting his commitment. Perhaps he shut you out for so long that you no longer feel secure in his closeness. When trust is fractured, the distance feels even greater. And many couples believe that once trust is broken, it cannot be rebuilt. But that is not true. Trust is not a one-time guarantee. It is a daily practice. Rebuilding trust begins not with grand promises, but with consistent presence. If you've been betrayed, you may long for declarations, for proof, for reassurance. But the thing that restores faith is not what is said, but what is lived. Does he show up when he says he will? Does he listen when you speak? Does he follow through on the small commitments that make a relationship feel safe? When those small consistencies stack up, slowly the foundation of trust is rebuilt. But here is something important. Rebuilding trust is not only his responsibility. It is also about your willingness to risk closeness again, to allow yourself to lean in, even when fear tells you to protect yourself, because without risk, intimacy cannot exist. The couples who survive broken trust are not the ones who avoid vulnerability, but the ones who dare to open again, cautiously at first, then more fully with time. And perhaps the most difficult, but also the most essential, part of closing the distance is this rediscovering the spark. Many couples believe that passion naturally dies over time, but passion doesn't die, it is starved. It starves when routine replaces novelty, when duty replaces desire, when predictability suffocates mystery. If you want your husband to come closer, you must find ways to reintroduce mystery into the relationship. Think about how you fell in love. It wasn't just his presence. It was the unknown about him, the curiosity, the discovery. Over time, marriage gives us stability, but it also steals mystery. We think we know everything about each other, and in that certainty, desire fades. But here is the secret: you do not know everything. He is not finished. You are not finished. Both of you are still evolving, still growing, still capable of surprise. So how do you bring back the spark? You create new experiences together. You see each other in unfamiliar contexts. You remind yourselves that the person sitting across from you is not just your partner, but also a man with layers you haven't fully explored. This might mean traveling together, taking up a new activity, or simply asking questions you haven't asked in years. What are you dreaming about these days? What's something you've always wanted to try but haven't? What scares you most about the future? These questions don't just spark conversation, they spark curiosity. And curiosity is the oxygen of desire. Let me give you an image. Imagine your relationship as a fire. In the beginning, it burns brightly, almost effortlessly. But over time, if you don't tend to it, the flames dim. The wood becomes embers. The warmth fades. Too many couples, when they see the fire dimming, assume it's gone forever. But intimacy is like fire. It can be rekindled. All it needs is attention, oxygen, and the willingness to stir the ashes. So if your husband is distant, don't only focus on pulling him closer. Focus also on fanning the flames of curiosity, play, and desire. Remember what it felt like to laugh together, to flirt, to choose each other not out of obligation but out of excitement. Those moments are not gone forever. They can be revived, but it requires both of you to step outside of the script of daily life and remember that marriage is not just a contract, it's an adventure. And as you do this, as you work to soften resentment, rebuild trust, and reignite desire, something begins to shift. Distance, which once felt like an endless chasm, becomes a space you can cross together. And the man who seemed so far away begins to lean in, not because you forced him, but because you created the conditions where closeness felt safe again. When you begin to notice his distance shrinking, when you feel those small moments of closeness returning, the laughter at something silly, the way he rests his hand on yours again, the softness in his voice when he tells you about his day, it can feel like a sigh of relief. You might think, finally we're back. Finally, he's here again. But intimacy is not a finish line you cross once. It's a living thing, a flame that needs tending. And if you're not mindful, the old habits that created distance in the first place can quietly return, pulling you apart once more. So the question becomes, how do you sustain closeness? How do you make sure that this renewed intimacy doesn't fade into silence again? The first answer lies in consistency. It is not the grand gestures that keep love alive. It is the steady accumulation of small, intentional moments, the daily check-ins, the way you pause to really look at him when he speaks, the kiss that lingers an extra second longer before he leaves for work. These are not dramatic acts, but they are the glue of intimacy. Love over time is not measured in fireworks, but in embers. The quiet warmth that never goes out because you keep feeding it. But here's the paradox. While consistency creates security, too much predictability suffocates desire. A relationship that is entirely predictable may feel safe, but it can also feel dead. Desire thrives on mystery, on surprise, on the unexpected. So if you want to keep him close, you must hold both. Consistency to nurture security and unpredictability to spark desire. It is this balance that keeps a marriage alive. Think of it like music. A song without rhythm feels chaotic, but a song without variation feels boring. Relationships need both rhythm and variation. The rhythm of trust, commitment, and reliability. The variation of play, adventure, and surprise. Too much of one without the other, and the music of intimacy begins to fade. This means creating rituals that anchor your connection, while also leaving room for spontaneity. Perhaps you create a ritual of having coffee together every Saturday morning. No phones, no distractions, just the two of you. That becomes your rhythm. But then every so often, you surprise him a spontaneous trip, an unexpected text in the middle of the day, a new way of touching him that makes him stop and notice. That becomes your variation. Together they form the melody of intimacy that keeps him leaning in. Now let's talk about another challenge: falling back into roles. In part 2, we explored how fixed roles can lead to distance, when he feels reduced to provider, or when you feel reduced to caretaker. Once you've broken out of those rigid patterns, it's crucial not to slip back in, because roles, while convenient, can strip a relationship of its vitality. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibilities. It means refusing to let them define the entirety of your connection. Yes, he may be the one who manages certain tasks and you may carry others, but beyond those roles, you must continue to see each other as lovers, as partners, as individuals with inner lives that stretch far beyond household logistics. If the relationship becomes nothing more than managing tasks, distance will always return. One way to avoid this trap is to keep curiosity alive. Even after years together, there is still more to discover. Ask him questions not just about his day, but about his inner world. What inspires him now? What scares him about the future? What does he fantasize about, whether in life, in work, or even in your intimacy? Curiosity reminds both of you that there is always more to learn, always more to explore, and where curiosity lives, distance struggles to survive. But here is something equally important. Sustaining closeness requires that you nurture yourself as well. Too many people in long marriages lose themselves in the relationship. They forget who they were outside of being a partner, a parent, or a caretaker. And when you lose yourself, two things happen. First, you begin to resent your partner for not fulfilling the parts of you that you abandoned. Second, you become less magnetic, less alive, because your world has shrunk. Intimacy thrives when two whole people come together, not when one disappears inside the other. So sustaining closeness with him requires also sustaining closeness with yourself. What lights you up? What passions, friendships, or projects remind you of who you are beyond the marriage? When you nurture those, you bring energy back into the relationship. You remind him and yourself that you are not just his partner, but a vibrant individual who is worth desiring. And this leads us to something vital: the role of freedom in sustaining love. It may sound counterintuitive, but sometimes the best way to keep him close is to allow him space. Distance often grows not from too much space, but from too little freedom. When one partner feels suffocated, when every moment is accounted for, every choice scrutinized, closeness turns into captivity, and captivity always breeds escape. So instead of clinging when he begins to pull back, consider offering him freedom. Let him take the time he needs to recharge, to engage in his own interests, to simply be. When he knows that closeness with you doesn't come at the cost of his autonomy, he will choose it more willingly. True intimacy is not built on possession, but on choice. And when a man feels that he is choosing you day after day rather than being trapped, his closeness becomes genuine. Finally, sustaining intimacy requires embracing imperfection. Too many couples chase the illusion of the perfect relationship, the one without conflict, without disappointment, without distance. But real intimacy is not about perfection. It is about repair. Every relationship will face distance. Every couple will have moments of silence, of misunderstanding, of frustration. What matters is not avoiding these moments, but how you respond to them. Do you let them harden into walls, or do you use them as opportunities to grow closer? Repair is the heartbeat of lasting love. When you argue, can you come back and say, "I'm sorry for the way I spoke. I was hurt, but I don't want distance between us"? When you feel him pull away, can you say, "I miss you," instead of, "You always do this"? Repair is not about never breaking. It's about always choosing to mend. And when repair becomes part of the fabric of your relationship, distance never gets the final word. So sustaining closeness is not about eliminating the possibility of distance. It is about creating a relationship where distance, when it arises, is met with curiosity, with repair, with choice. Where both of you know that even when you drift, you can always find your way back. There comes a moment in every long-term relationship when you have to pause, look at the person beside you, and ask, do we still choose each other? Not just in name, not just in obligation, but in the quiet daily ways that matter most. Because love is not a one-time promise, it's a practice. And when distance creeps in, it is an invitation to either drift apart or to rise together. If you've been listening closely, you've likely felt the sting of recognition. The late-night silences, the way his body feels present, but his heart feels elsewhere. The ache of longing for closeness while wondering if it will ever return. But you've also heard the truth: distance is not the end. It is not the final chapter. It is a signal, a call to pay attention. And what you do with that call will shape not just your marriage, but the story of your love. So let's return to the question that started this journey. What do you do when he feels distant? You begin with presence, with curiosity, with the willingness to build a bridge instead of chasing him in panic. You learn to respond with listening instead of judgment, with softness instead of accusation. You resist the temptation to make his withdrawal about your worth, and instead, you see it as a reflection of the dance between you. You take responsibility for your part not as blame, but as empowerment, because every shift you make in the rhythm of your relationship creates space for him to shift to, and then you begin the work of repair. You soften the edges of resentment. You allow trust to rebuild slowly, not through promises but through consistency. You bring back play, desire, curiosity, the qualities that first made you choose each other. You create a marriage that is both safe and alive, steady and surprising. A marriage where distance may appear but never takes root. But perhaps the most important truth is this: you cannot bring him back by losing yourself. Intimacy thrives not when two people collapse into each other, but when two whole, vibrant individuals meet in the space between. If you want him to come closer, keep nurturing yourself. Keep tending to your passions, your friendships, your vitality, because nothing is more magnetic than a partner who is alive, who radiates a sense of self that says, I am with you not because I need you, but because I choose you. And here's the paradox. When you no longer chase him from fear, when you stand steady in your own strength, he often feels safer to return. Men do not draw closer when they sense desperation. They draw closer when they sense a partner who is rooted, who is open, who is alive. That steadiness becomes an invitation, a quiet reassurance that love is still here, waiting for him to step back into it. So if you find yourself staring across that dinner table, itching for connection, know this: it is not too late. Distance is not permanent. What matters is not how far he has pulled away, but how you choose to respond. Will you close your heart in return, or will you create the space that allows his heart to open again? This is not easy work. It requires patience, courage, and above all, a willingness to see love not as something that simply happens, but as something you actively create. But imagine what becomes possible if you do. Imagine lying beside him, not in silence, but in ease. Imagine laughing together again, not out of politeness, but because joy has returned. Imagine reaching for his hand and feeling him reach back, not out of duty, but out of desire. That is the reward of choosing to act before it's too late, to recognize that distance is not a verdict but a warning, and warnings, when listened to, can save not only marriages, but the love that lives inside them. So here's my invitation to you. Take one small step today, not a grand confrontation, not an ultimatum, not a desperate plea, just one small step of softness, curiosity, or desire. Look at him a little longer. Touch him without agenda. Ask him a question you've never asked. Create a moment of connection without demanding where it leads, and then watch what happens. Because sometimes all it takes is a spark of presence to remind both of you of the fire that still burns beneath the ashes. And as you do, remember this: you are not powerless. You are not waiting for him to return on his own. You are a participant in this love, a co-creator of the intimacy you long for. And when you choose presence over panic, invitation over accusation, play over predictability, you breathe life back into your marriage. So let me leave you with this thought: love does not die from distance. Love dies from neglect. And if you are here seeking, listening, yearning, then you are not neglecting it. You are fighting for it. And that alone means there is hope. Stay steady, stay open, stay alive. Because the man you love is not as far away as he seems. And the closeness you long for is not gone. It is waiting just beyond the walls of fear for you both to step into it again.